Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining today's Tenant Talk Live. We are so excited that you're with us here. Yet again, as you know, we do these talks every 2 weeks. And so we're going to get started in just about a minute or so. I just want to make sure that people have an opportunity to join. So just a couple of things before we get started. If you take a look at the bottom of your screen, you'll see a chat button. And in that chat button, and also a Q&A button. But that is where you can ask questions of us. And many of you have been on this call before, so I know you already know how to do it. But I definitely wanted to share that with you before we got started. And if we can test that out, if you don't mind, I would love to know where people are from. So if you can use that chat button while we give others an opportunity to join us, use the chat button and let us know where you're from. So let's see, we have someone already. Let's see. All right, we have Gwen from Las Vegas. We have Mrs. Brown from New York. We have Tyree from NYCHA. Lafayette Gardens. We have Angie from Washington, D.C. We have Tyree again, sorry, from New York City. Thank you, Tyree. Let's see. We have Joy Johnson from Charlottesville. We have Jan from Chicago. And this is going so quickly, but I love it. This is Molly. We have Molly from Florida. We have Bayo Ware from Oregon. And yeah, this is awesome. So we're glad that you're here and you're joining us. Let's give it just a few more seconds before we get started. But we certainly do have a lot to cover. Let's see. All right. Let's see, we have Erica from Connecticut. Welcome, Erica. So yeah, so thank you, everyone. Thanks for joining today. Madeline, thank you, Madeline. She's also from Chicago. I see a few people here from Chicago and from New York. We have Sherry from Texas. Hello, Sherry. Thank you for joining us. All right. All right, everyone. So, and I'll just say hello also to Alice from Florida. Thank you for joining. So why don't we go ahead and get started? As I mentioned earlier, we have a lot to cover. But again, my name is Renee Willis. I'm with the National Low Income Housing Coalition. Certainly thrilled that you're here with us this evening or this afternoon, depending on where you are. And today, and as you may already know, because I know a lot of you have been with us here before on Tenant Talk Live. But Tenant Talk Live, it's an opportunity for us to have conversation with you, even if it is via chat. But also to connect with one another, to share best practices, and also to see how we and you can be more involved in federal housing policy and in influencing it. So we are recording this call, and we will make the recording available to you after this webinar. And we will also make room for your questions and answer your questions so that we hopefully can answer your questions. We have with us today Kyle Arbuckle, he's with the coalition, and he's one of our housing advocacy organizers. And Kyle is going to provide updates on the impacts of the coronavirus pandemic and how residents can advocate for needed resources. So we'll hear from Kyle a little bit later in the program. But first, I am very excited again to have with us Keith Swiney. Keith has been with us many times before. Keith is from Georgia. And Keith is going to talk about how residents can leverage the power of resident management councils. Keith, his organization, his company is called Motiviation, Inc. And Keith has been in this business now for over, I believe, 34 years. And he's had opportunities, I believe, to meet with many of the tenants who are on this call today. As well as to provide trainings and workshops to community development organizations, to residents, to resident councils, and you name it. So Keith, thank you so very much for being with us this evening, and I'm going to turn it over to you.
Well, wonderful. Thank you so very much. I hope everyone can hear me okay. It's kind of like old home week when I do the National Low Income Housing Coalition Tenant Talk Live, because so many of the people that I heard you call out are folks who've been in front of me at my trainings nationally for many, many years now. So for all of you all, welcome and thank you for your time and attention. The topic tonight is really, really critical, and it's really important, and I would say center to the work that I did when I first became familiar with Section 3. I was very fortunate that an RMC president in Atlanta, under Atlanta Housing Authority at the time, came to me in 1997 and actually introduced me to Section 3. So it's really an exciting thing for me to be able to share the RMCs, because I've always long considered it to be really the hidden gem of being in public housing and really, exercising the power that you have. So I'm going to kind of dive right in. There's who we are and a bit more about our firm, as you just heard Renee talk about. And Renee, thank you guys again for the opportunity to come. Uh-oh, I went a little faster than I meant to that time. Hold on, let me see how to go back in. Hold on, I'm going to do the old back thing on my other computer. There we go. Because I've got two screens working. You just didn't know that. Okay, so let's dive in. First and foremost, RMCs, the resident management corporations, are hugely powerful tools. For those of you in Chicago, for example, where I know they've had RMCs for a great number of years, the RMC and the power of it is just what it says. It's a resident management corporation. It is what allows residents to take control and management of their own properties. There can be multiple RMCs operating inside of one city where each RMC manages its own property. What I haven't seen is I've never seen a jurisdiction-wide type RMC setup ever manage multiple properties. That's not to say it couldn't happen, and as we review the rules on this, it's pretty simple stuff. The truth is it could happen, I guess. There's nothing that says it can't, but it would come down to capacity. And in fact, I would start by saying everything that I'm about to talk about really comes down to capacity and taking a resident association or a resident council to that next level, to a resident management corporation. The rules are very basic. As I'm going to go through them, these apply to when any housing authority and its residents, as the rule states, are interested in providing that resident performance of several management functions. Now, what that means is, in addition to managing a property, you collect rents, you're responsible for its daily upkeep, you're responsible for the maintenance and work orders, you're also responsible for the capital needs and capital improvements you'll see through the rule. So multiple management functions is that over time, you are qualified and capable to take over the full operations of that asset. And that's really where you want to be. The responsibilities are pretty basic. If a resident association or council is interested in contracting with a housing authority, they must establish a management corporation. And that management corporation basically has to be a management corporation as defined, and you have to be legally formed. You have to have the state requirements, whatever those may be, for a management company. You must also have your federal identification number and be structured to pay taxes and employment taxes and all of those things. Additionally, though, if you're going to get into the business of also handling all of the capital needs and in any way performing what we call construction management for those projects, you may be required to have a contractor's license as part of what your overall capabilities are. So please remember that. Again, ideally, you should manage all of the asset, not just part of it, because if you don't manage all of it, you end up with a lot of finger pointing. I don't like that. It never works out well. So you having the capacity to do all things are important. I'd like to point out to you, there is kind of this misnomer, a fallacy about this that just never has held true. A resident management corporation can hire expert system or persons to help them do their jobs. Now, that primary work, that 51% of all work and activities, has to be performed by residents. However, if you need to go out and hire a particular company to perform a particular service, You can do that as part of your overall team. So don't be afraid to think about, hey, if we need somebody who does accounting, where do we get that? If we need someone who can oversee the construction management, where can we get that? Be sure you don't have to have all of those tools. Just like any other property management company, you just have to have access to those tools, okay? Going on, under responsibilities, it says, hey, the housing authority shall give full and serious consideration to resident management corporations seeking to enter into these management contracts. And remember, everything you do must be through a management contract. This is not some MOU or MOA process. This is a solid contract that says how much you're going to receive, either as a per door fee per month, meaning for every public housing door or other door you manage, you receive either a set dollar fee per month. In some cases, that fee might be $26 a door. I can tell you in Chicago, they got as high as $34 a door, maybe even more than that per month. So there's a lot of money to be made in property management. I've owned 3 management companies, so let me tell you, there's a lot of money to be made in property management, but you have to do it right. And in some cases, the fee may be structured as a percentage of all earnings or all monies paid except for deposits. And in the percentage basis, that usually will happen after a property has been redeveloped, okay? So just keep in mind, there is money to be paid, and all the salaries for the people who work on those properties are paid for as part of the overall operations of that property. So if you're doing a budget, and I know this comes up a lot, so I'm trying to answer it now because they don't deal with this in the rule, but if you are saying, hey, I'd like to manage this property and we have 200 units, and we look at all the rents that come in, the manager, assistant manager, recertification clerks, whatever it is you need, maintenance staff, all of their salaries are paid for out of the property's income, not out of your fee. Anyone over a property manager would be paid for out of your fee. So if you have a regional manager, that sort of thing. So do keep that in mind, okay? Duty to bargain in good faith. The regulation is very clear that the housing authority cannot simply dismiss you. They have an obligation to bargain with you, meaning you come in and you give them a proposal with a fee to manage the property. And they say, well, we don't like it. Well, that's not the end of the conversation. Either they agree to negotiate with you to the point in which both parties can come to an agreement, or HUD is then going to step in, and you have every right to invite HUD to the table, and then HUD will then find a way to bring the parties together to a satisfactory, hopefully, conclusion. But again, this is business, and business is all about knowing your numbers and a little bit of give and take. But again, I think it's really important that every person in public housing understand they have the capability to control their destiny a lot more than they are today. And I would recommend that you consider looking at this. I mean, just sit down and talk about it as a council or association. Start looking at the numbers. Ask the housing authority for the numbers. Say, hey, how much subsidy do we get for this property? How much rent is paid for this property? You have every right to request a copy of the actual rent roll. And then you have actually have the right to look at the overall operations of your property. As everyone knows, HUD went to a project-based budgeting operational format back in 2004. So there is no reason that any housing authority in the country cannot run a report for you showing you exactly what that individual property does right down to the penny every month. What that will allow you to do is then decide whether or not this thing is operating well enough that you want to get involved. Or the property is not operating well at all and they're feeding money into it to keep it going. Now, again, I know I'm interjecting some stuff, but that's the way training works. If you aren't certain exactly what that means when I say the property is operating well enough, means that the property has enough money coming in, rent from residents plus subsidy from HUD, that it's able to pay all of its bills and have something left over. If you do not see that there's something left over at the bottom line, don't touch it. Walk away. The problem is any assets that are non-performing you don't want to end up being responsible for. Because if they're already financially in trouble, unless you know you have a secret weapon to bring those properties up financially, you might want to not look at those properties. And if you have questions on it, you have my contact information at the end. Feel free, shoot me an email at any time. I'm happy to look over your documents for you, walk you through them, make sure you understand what they mean, okay? Again, the management contract between the Housing Authority and the RMC is required for all property management. It is important that you understand that all the duties and responsibilities, those functions of a property manager, of the Housing Authority, are going to be transferred to you under this contract. If the Housing Authority so decides that they want to, what we call feathering in opportunities or functions, meaning, hey, we're going to teach you all how to manage this property. We're going to have your people, your resident council people, sit side by side with our staff for 5-6 months, whatever it is, to learn how to do the job. And then at the end of that period, we're going to turn over different functions to you once we know that the RMC has the capability. If the RMC can go out and get training in property management and learn what they need to learn and have maybe even a consulting contract with someone to help guide them when they run into difficulty, fine. Whatever it takes for you to build your capacity to take over on day one, that's great. But just know that you have to be ready, and the Housing Authority by contract is going to insist that you are, okay? Procurement requirements. Everyone asks about whether or not they're going to be held to a particular procurement standard. The good news is HUD makes very clear, and I'm going to I don't know if you can see my little arrow here or not, I hope you can. It says provisions on competitive bidding and requirements of prior written HUD approval of contracts contained in the ACC do not apply to the decision of a Housing Authority to contract with an RMC. In real language, what that means is they don't have to do competitive bidding. This is a situation where they can do a sole source. If the RMC comes with the proper capacity and is prepared, they can absolutely sole source you to do the work. Because, why? Well, because you are a Tier 1 HUD recipient, and all of the documents currently written in the public housing handbooks all point toward resident capacity building and including self-sufficiency. And management is a great way to get you there. So there are many things that they can do to get you this contract. Now, someone right now is asking the question, I can hear it in your heads. Can they pay for the training to get us there? Well, the short answer is yes, and the long answer is maybe. Depending upon the financial circumstances, what it is that the RMC is asking for, how that looks, right? There's, again, everything's a negotiation. If you have your tenant participation dollars, you want to talk about the perfect use of those tenant participation funds. This is it. Get yourselves trained in property management. Get your people trained in property management. Have a number of people who are either experienced or who desire to do this work and will stick with it, and make certain that they get trained. That's where you really are going to have to take a little bit of the leadership role to move this thing forward. Okay, rights of families, operations of projects. All right, so I'm going to kind of summarize this because it reads a little goofy and you won't understand it. But it starts off by saying, if a resident management corporation is approved by the tenant organization representing one or more buildings or an area of row houses that are part of public housing project for purposes of Part 941 of this chapter. Paul, 941 deals with the Section 18 redevelopment, okay? That's non-RAD, but that is a Section 18 demo disposition type action. The resident management program may not, as determined by the Housing Authority, interfere with the rights of other residents of such project or harm the efficient operations of such project. All right, what does that mean? It means that if your management contract happens to cover more than one individual property, so if I were in Chicago back in the old days, when I grew up in Chicago, I used to hang out over at 51st and Federal as an example, amongst other properties that CHA had. And one of the things that you would find is literally there may be one property, but they have multiple buildings. Tyree in New York, Mrs. Brown, you all know exactly what I'm describing. In New York, you may have one property, but you may have 10, 15 buildings in some cases. Believe it or not, if the housing authority targets one of those buildings to be done through a demolition of Section 18, or even just a disposition, they're going to sell it. Your contract cannot interfere with that disposition or demolition. That's what they're saying. Now, what does that mean? Well, that means that when you are looking at taking over management, question number one should be, in addition to, I need to see all the documents on these properties, I need to know where these properties are on your, redevelopment list, if anywhere. Are you planning to redevelop this asset within the next 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 years? You just want to know if it's on the list and where. Why? Because that will affect how much management fee you earn and whether or not you'll start losing units. And moreover, what if a group of families on one of those buildings decides they want to purchase that one building under the 941? They have a right to do so. Guess what? Your management contract cannot interfere. So you must remember that, because with all of the redevelopment going on today, that's bound to hit some of you very quickly. Now, again, I'm trying to do a little bit of mind reading. As you all know, I'm not great at webinars. I can't see your lovely faces, because this is that point in which I normally look around the room and I watch the eyes, and I can tell by the eyes where you are and what you're thinking, believe it or not. And then I'll look at you and I'll pause and wait for you to tell me. Well, I don't get to do that. So let me say this to you. Some of you are wondering probably, hey, can I create an RMC and manage a property that is already slated for a RAD conversion or a Section 18 demo dispo? Well, the short answer is that's going to be negotiable. It has to be negotiable, because if it isn't negotiable, you could end up going through a lot of expense for nothing. Let me give you an example. Let's say the housing authority has targeted your particular property for a RAD conversion starting next year. And in 2021, they are planning to start that process, holding the meetings, doing the things with you. And it's their intent to completely redevelop the asset, and therefore everyone's going to get displaced. I don't know that that's a contract I would go after unless I could figure out a way to negotiate the management of the property once it comes back online. And that means you're going to have probably some tax credit certification for your people as well. But you would have time to work on it. But that is my thinking. So again, that's going to be one of those you're going to want to ask a lot of questions. Feel free to come back to me. Okay. All right. Comprehensive improvement assistance with RMCs. Now, these next several slides are all kind of the same thing. Comprehensive improvement, meaning that all of the capital needs for that asset are going to be done through your contract. You heard me say that at the outset. Your particular contract is going to be executed, and you're going to actually have the responsibility. Note it says here in number 2, the housing authority shall not retain for any administrative or other reason any portion of the comprehensive improvement assistance program are provided unless the PHA and the RMC provide otherwise by contract. Meaning, if you say, boy, we don't want to touch any of the capital need stuff, we just want to run the day-to-day, then your contract has to state that so. If it doesn't, HUD automatically assumes that when you take over the operations of the property, you're actually taking it over and going to handle all the capital need stuff. And this next slide continues that. It says, in assessing the modernization needs of its projects under 24 CFR Part 968 or other grant mechanisms established by the Housing and Community Development Act of 1987, the Housing Authority must consult with the Tenant Management Corporation regarding any project management by the corporation in order to determine the modernization needs and preferences of resident managed projects, blah, blah, blah. Meaning that you sit down, you're talking about management, you say, okay, and one of the things I need to look at housing is, in addition to your current rent roll, your current profit and loss statement on this property, tenant receivables, I'd like to also see your last physical needs assessment. If you have a green P&A, the physical needs assessment, I want to see that. And in addition to that, I'd like to see your 5-year plan for this property to determine what specific work is scheduled for. If you look at it and you don't see items specific to your property, it doesn't mean there won't be any. It just means they aren't currently in the annual and 5-year plan. Then you need to have a discussion with them about how are we going to begin to prepare for that. Meaning, if we need roofs, if we need appliances, those capital needs items, right? Maybe there are problems with the infrastructure and you know you need water lines or boilers, whatever it is, that's the sort of thing you are negotiating. And all of those details must be in your overall management plan. So that is a word that HUD doesn't use. So I just said it and I will explain it, a management plan. One of the things the Housing Authority will likely request from you is a management plan, okay? A management plan is very basic, so don't get all wrapped up into words and terms. Each one of those documents are articulated. The rent roll, the profit and loss or P&L statement for that property. I wanna make sure I can see all the tenant accounts receivables. I wanna know what's in legal, right? How many people have been turned over to the attorney for eviction? Do I have any housekeeping violations? I want to know everything there is to know about this property and all of the capital needs items, right? I want all of that information. All of that is what goes into a management plan. And then you talk about how you're going to respond to or manage each of these particular items, if that makes any sense. So if the tenant accounts receivables, TARs as they refer to them, if the tenant's accounts are low, and meaning residents aren't paying the rents they're supposed to, you need to understand why, what's being done, are people in repay agreements, what's happening. So all of that information that goes into your management plan, they're gonna provide you, and then you're gonna talk about what sort of things you can do to help to increase those rents, right? Are we in COVID-19 and a lot of our residents are in forward-facing jobs and just afraid to go to work for fear of being sick or dying? Well, that's a real issue, right? Then what is your plan? How do you plan to work that out? Are you going to start working with other local employers to see where you can get some of your people employed? What is your plan? That's what you should be thinking. Remember, the objective of an RMC, that Resident Management Corporation, is generally because the residents say, we believe we can do this better. That's the objective, okay? And if you aren't saying that to yourself, you probably don't want to get involved, right? To be honest with you, because status quo really isn't a reason to take on a lot of work and a lot of liability. So don't do it to yourself, all right? HUD then goes down to talk about those direct provisions of assisting that RMC. So the RMC positions HUD for the release of funds. Now, let me make sure you understand this. The RMC, not the Housing Authority, will be paid those modernization funds. All of that capital money, that will come directly to you. And the RMC is responsible for showing how they executed the proper procurement under the law to procure the necessary goods or services to then meet the needs of those capital items, right? So if there is, and this is a really low-hanging fruit example, maybe you need to start replacing appliances, and it's on a 5-year replacement plan. So every year, you're gonna replace 20% for 5 years to get all of your appliances replaced in 5 years. You have to be able to demonstrate once that HUD provides you that, it's in your plan, and they give you the money, that you're gonna go out to the market and you have to demonstrate how you're gonna be able to procure that in an open and fair competition to ensure that all those appliances are being purchased at best market price and best market service, okay? So that's part of it. But this whole section talks about your accounting capability and your responsibility as HUD's giving you that money to make certain, that you all are meeting all of the same requirements as the Housing Authority itself had to do. And again, that may mean you need to go out and get some assistance on the accounting side. Again, same thing. I'm not going to belabor that point, but I did want to give it all to you. Waiver of HUD requirements. Okay, again, let's summarize this big packet. Now, what I did is I gave you the entire portion of the rule here, dealing with the RMC. I didn't take anything out. I gave you every bit of it. But for the sake of time, let me summarize the waiver of HUD's requirements. Sometimes HUD has a certain number of requirements that housing authorities are required to meet. And what the rule says is that you can actually request from HUD to waive some of those requirements if you don't feel that they are necessary under your management of a property, under your control, and maybe some of those, what we call specific controls that HUD put in place for that housing authority, maybe it was because of other properties or other assets or things that were happening at the corporate office and nothing related to the property. So then you simply go to HUD and say, hey, HUD, we'd like you to waive all of these requirements. Like, for instance, a requirement that every time before we spend more than $2,000, we have to come to you and get approval. Believe it or not, in some cases that is required. Now, though I didn't jump into it earlier, I was kind of waiting till now. I want you to understand that, again, the RMC must be able to operate the property at a standard performer level. You aren't required to be at high performer level, but you need to be able to operate at standard performer level. HUD will likely not release you from any of the requirements without it. Now, please keep in mind that the property you're taking over may be at a high performer level. That's great. That only means that you have some big shoes to fill and you still have to operate that property at that high level. Again, you'll know that because one of the specific items, in addition to the others I've talked about that I want you to get your hands on, is I want you to look at their last REAC, right? You need to see what all of the scores are for your property. Was it something with emergencies that brought a score down? Was it infrastructure items? You know, were there life safety items? All of those things you want to know before you take a property over. I mean, it's just super, super important that you understand that. Property management is not the most difficult business you'll ever be in, but it is the most heart-wrenching business you will ever be in. So I'm going to cover just one last thing, and then I'm going to dive into what that looks like a little and then take your questions. Notice here, monitoring of RMC performance. The Housing Authority must review periodically, but not less than annually, the management corporation's performance to ensure it complies with all of the applicable requirements and meets, notice that, and meets agreed upon standards of performance. The method of review and criteria used to judge the performance should be specified in your management contract. I won't name names, but there's a city in the northeast that had an RMC managing its property. And then they, in the year 2 of the contract, chose to employ a new kind of assessment that they were applying to the resident management corporation. It was not applied to any other part of their operations, but just to those one properties that were being self-managed by residents. That is a violation of the rule. If they want to develop some sort of an oversight mechanism, not a problem, but that needs to be specified and inside the contract so that you all are actually working towards specific requirements and not being hit with some sort of a surprise or people changing the game after the contract is signed. That can happen. So again, know what you know. And to that end, all right, so I'm at the end of the overall presentation. My goal was to do that in 30 minutes. I actually met that if you look at our start time. And I want to cover a couple things. Now, I put it in and I yanked it out. Now, I did that because I said, I don't want to take these folks too far down the field. But let me explain to you how simple property management is. There's an owner. I don't care what you call the owner, they're an owner. Some are institutional, some of those owners are private, some are groups, you just don't know. They're owners. They own the piece of real estate or a group of units of real estate. That owner hires a management company. The management company is responsible for all of the day-to-day operations, rent collection, so forth, the banking, so forth. They even, in many cases, they will pay every bill, including the mortgage, if there is one. The management company hires all of the on-site staff. The on-site staff are responsible for everything that happens on that property. The management company is paid a fee, as we talked about earlier. From that fee, the management company makes a profit. The management company only makes a profit if the people on site are doing the job they're supposed to do and can require the least amount of oversight. If the management company has to spend too much time of a regional manager or area VP on that property because the on-site manager isn't doing the job, that company is actually losing money because they cannot charge the area VP salary to the property. Meaning that if you're going to take on this task, make certain that the right people are in the right place at the right time to do the job. Make certain that the people are trained. Make certain that they understand their jobs. There's a simple and clear scope of duties that they have, and that you are prepared to take this on. Bring in your attorneys, and this is where it's really important. Bring in your attorney. You need to have an attorney at your hip if you're in property management. Management companies get sued constantly. I sold my last one in 2003. And like they say about boats, there's two great days, the day you bought the boat and the day you sold it. It is the same way with property management companies. I've owned 3, as I mentioned, and I sold my last one because I'm telling you, the risk involved in running management is just crazy. And I'm not just talking about the normal slip and fall. They didn't get the snow pushed in time. I fell on the ice. Oh, there was a hole in my wall. Oh, my kid ate lead paint. I'm not talking about all the basics. I'm talking about the humans that will work for you. The people who say, oh, he touched my butt. Oh, she touched my this. That stuff will kill you and your productivity and your profit, because every one of those things have to be adhered to under the law. And that's the stuff that people don't often think about, but you're running a business, and everything and all the risk involved in running a business will exist on that one property. That's what you need to know. All right, ladies and gentlemen, that is it for me. I guess we can get to Q&A. Is it okay if I close this down, Renee, or?
Yeah, that's fine.
All right. So I'm going to stop sharing. Is that the right answer?
Sure.
Yay, yep. Stop sharing. Now what I do? Let's get rid of that. Hello, I'm back with you now. Okay.
Just want to remind people that you can either ask questions in the Q&A box or you can raise your hand. Nicole Smith has raised her hand, so.
Hi, this is actually Nakia Sims.
Oh, hi, Nakia. Sorry.
Edit. So I definitely appreciate both this workshop and the workshop that you did in May. It is definitely a plethora of information. So as you know, I have quite a few questions that I presented. I guess initially what I've heard today and the last one, are RMCs limited to property management? Because in the previous workshop, I know someone was asking about workforce development type things. Is it just limited to things on the property, or is it other HUD functions with like CARES funding for workforce development, or are there other opportunities with less risk or liability?
Okay, that's a great question. Short answer, my friend, is that there's no such thing as less risk. Anytime, and I don't mean to be negative, but you have to know that I have owned and run many businesses, and I've employed a lot of humans. And the one thing I tell everybody is, the moment you add one human to a business with one other human, that's when you will have your problem, right? That's where conflict comes in, and all of the risk factors are in play at that moment. They certainly grow with the number of humans you employ or are working with and the task assigned. However, in answer to your question, the RMC rule was written specifically for the functions in and around management. Now, as far as I'm concerned, I've had a lot of properties where we've managed public housing where, believe it or not, workforce development was our job. We had resident services teams whose jobs were really quite diverse. They did everything from skills trainings or helping people identify skills trainings, getting their GEDs as part of the process of their jobs. They worked with local employers to get people employed. So all of those things are part of it. Remember the part of the rule that talks about all of these different functions? I would recommend you take them all, not part. And I'm not certain that without the management that you can automatically take over these others unless the housing authority is already procuring that particular service. If, for example, as you gave, if that sort of human, if we call it human development, whether it's professional development, skills training, soft skills, whatever, if that is a function that the housing authority is already outsourcing, the Section 3 rule would allow you as a resident-owned business, different than a resident management corporation, you'd have to meet the rules as a resident-owned business, but if you met that and had the qualifications, yes, you could certainly compete for that sort of a contract.
Yeah, so a couple of follow-ups. So as a law graduate from a tier 1 school, as expired real estate license, teacher certification, and just lived experiences, low income, wealth of experiences. And I wish I would have met you 10 years ago when I reached out to Section 3 before I was a resident and before I actually became an assistant property manager, because I could have like put into action. And I'm about not just self, but like you talked about in the last, the numbers of people. So I'm about like reaching out to others and other, like New York Housing and Ms. Brown, like all of those things. So without just carrying on, my other questions would be, how do I find out that, so I've gone to the Section 3 registry, which I'm reaching out to all of the HUD people that presented last week, because that particular system, I'd like to see the SEO, because just on the resident end, Section 3, I looked at Houston, I looked at New York, no opportunities, and in California, like 6 opportunities. So I'm not sure about traffic in that, if it's the intention is, if it's actually being applied as intended. So my question would be finding, because I've also looked at the registered businesses, and as you know, finding out where CARES Act funding is going with workforce development. So how do I find out, especially when it comes to workforce development, someone who has seen where there are missed opportunities for people that are ready to work, that have skills, but they just haven't been given an opportunity. So how do I find out where those funds are at and how they've been outsourced? And I live in Houston, so the Houston Public Housing Authority is where I'm going to the next board meeting in August.
All right, so you first of all are doing the right things, because what a lot of residents don't do is they don't get engaged. So I appreciate that, and I really respect it. And by going to the board meeting, and I'm super excited that they are transitioning or have transitioned with a new CEO there. I would certainly hope and pray for your sake that Houston Housing Authority is more resident-centered than it had been in the past. I think they did a great talking job. I think they performed very little. And that's my personal opinion after spending a year and a half in that market. So I would say to you, go to the board meeting, start asking questions. Everything that they do is an open records item. So you can do that and do an open records request per their requirements and get all the information that you need to know. Who are you contracting? Is that an outsource? That sort of thing. Damian Kelly, I just happen to know, is their Section 3 coordinator, whatever his title is there. And I think he reports to Cheryl Rivers still. In fact, I'm pretty positive he does.
Yes, I have emails from her where she's pretty much said I was overeducated and should go to a temporary firm for help.
Yeah, that has been pretty much the MO. I'm willing to bet you I have 20 emails from other residents in Houston who said the same thing. So again, I would say to you, if you don't mind my being honest with you, because I love being honest with people, it's easier to remember a truth than a lie. I'm not a fan, right? I will be quite frank with you. I've actually turned down work to go back to Houston because Cheryl Rivers is the one human being, and I'm not ashamed to say it. I actually got a call from HUD in DC on the Jobs Plus program, and they literally asked me if it was true that she said something. And I said, yeah. I said, I don't understand it, because her theory is that residents literally will pay for what they want and they beg for what they need. And that's a direct quote, by the way. And we kind of had a part in other ways right about then. So let me be honest with you, Ms. Smith. I think you have some work to do. I don't think that it's a lost effort. I think you need to develop a relationship with the new CEO and his leadership team, or hers. I don't know who's coming in or who is there. But please make an effort to get to know them. Talk about what your skills are. Talk about what you can bring to the table. There are other people there, because we did training. We had 159 people on day one. You all in Houston topped the list of the number of, and I'm thinking back, of the number of people with advanced degrees that we'd ever had nationally. So that was a pretty big deal, right? So I know there are a lot of people like you there. I would suggest that you start at the top, start a dialogue, say, here's what I'd like to do. How can I help you with this process? And where you aren't successful at the housing authority, go over to the city. The city definitely needs a lot of that stuff. There's a woman, I hope she's still there. Her name is Crystal Boyd. Yeah. Have you talked to Crystal over at the city?
I have an email. I actually conferred with someone else this morning before sending it to all of the people that presented last week. So her, and then within the Houston housing, I forget the community, there's Karen Franklin. So locally, I've kind of built, I'm aware of some of the actors and players and just in like reaching out and navigating what is said and what is actually being done is what is challenging.
I have the last part really fast that I have to respond to of your question. The reason why in the HUD registry, in the portal, you don't see any stuff there is because to date, HUD hasn't done a very good job of marketing that. They've talked to the housing authorities about it at a very limited level. They've talked to the cities, counties, and states about it at a very limited level, but they don't talk to contractors about it really. Contractors don't know that that portal is there. They don't know that it's a place in which they can post their jobs, but the systems around it have been really, really bad. So right now, HUD is, in the process of changing SPEARS. That portal is supposed to stay, but be enhanced. So I would say keep an eye out on it. When the new rule comes out under Section 3, I think you're gonna see some dramatic changes, although it may not be until year end, but they are working on it from what I understand, okay?
Thank you, Keith.
You're
welcome.
welcome.
Thank you, Nakia. Thank you so much for asking the question. So we're going to move on to the next question. Kyle.
Yeah, we have a lot of good questions. So the first one I'm going to read is from Michael Pierce. He said, this all seems to apply to public housing governed by a housing authority. Are there similar provisions for other resident-owned communities? I'm thinking in particular of manufactured home parks where residents from cooperatives form cooperatives and purchase the parks as ROCs. Can such communities get funding from HUD for management training or tap other benefits mentioned? Thanks.
Gosh, you know what, Michael? I've never heard of any such funding being available. I've gotten this question many times. I've looked in a lot of different places. I just have I've never found it, and I've never found a provision that supports it. Unfortunately, what you're seeing is something that was driven a long, long time ago around resident self-sufficiency. And one of the beliefs that HUD had way back in the late 60s and early 70s is that if you give the residents control of their own environment, that they are likely to do a better job with it. And that's where this comes from. So it's not the same in other outside rules. I do apologize. Next.
Linda Soderstrom asks, can you create a workforce housing complex with support services built in from scratch?
Can you build it? That's an interesting question. So is she asking, can she build that sort of a program for housing?
So Linda, if you want to clarify your question, but yeah.
Linda, okay, so if that's the question, I mean, you can, but again, you have to know that housing authorities either do that directly or they outsource it. Right? A lot of people have partnerships with other local entities, whatever they're called, workforce groups, what have you. So if that's something you'd like to put together and you're experienced at doing so, again, the same information I just gave with Ms. Smith, I don't think you go wrong by meeting with the leadership and proposing something. You can do what's called an unsolicited proposal in public housing. You can develop a full proposal and you can submit it to the housing authority without them having procured it. The rules say that the housing authority has the right to review it, and if they choose to move forward, depending upon the proposal, they may have to put it out for bid with other people, meaning they're going to take all of your information and develop a procurement for it. So you have to know what you know and that you're comfortable with them doing it. But yeah, and if that's something you want to talk about, feel free. We can email each other later on. Go ahead.
Great. Mrs. Brown from New York asked if your public housing development has gone through rental assistance demonstration RAD. Can you create an RMC, a RMC?
The rules did not continue. The RAD in particular does not continue the RMC after conversion. Let's put it that way. Again, I think this is a before conversion because that's the only language that's currently inside the rule. Now, I'd like to point out, and of course, Ms. Brown is aware, unfortunately, many of the supporting rules in public and Indian housing have not been updated to tie into RAD. So when you see it mentions that 941, it doesn't talk about RAD at all because RAD wasn't around then. So I think, though, the short answer is get your act together, do it before conversion. And that's the right time to put it in place, because if you don't, the big money is being made after conversion. And let me tell you, those dollars are very, very different. They're getting anywhere from 3 to 6% of rents of total collection every month for management fees. They're huge. Okay.
Tyree from New York wanted to know, what if you just want to take over one building, not all 7?
That's going to be a negotiation, Tyree. Hello, first of all. And that is going to be a negotiation, Tyree. You're going, because the problem is the accounting system is broken down by property, not by building generally. If NYCHA should have something that detailed where they could give you that information, great. But I would honestly say to you that may not be realistic. Next.
I think Nakia had her question answered. Okay. Madeline Morales, this might be a general question for anyone on the call, but Keith, you might know. She noticed that New York has free classes for property management. Do you know if Chicago has classes like that?
No, one of the Chicago people can probably answer that and see. I will tell you, though, we developed the first property management leasing consultant training class that was approved by Department of Labor a number of years ago. It is the perfect entry level, everything you need to know, no matter where you are kind of course. So whenever someone is offering property management, I want you to make sure that whatever you're looking at the end of that course, there is some job placement. I mean, if there is no job placement, whether in-house or out-house, if there's no job placement, you're wasting your time probably, okay?
Sherry might need to clarify this question, but she asked, how do you find out who the owners are?
Of any building, or yeah, you're right. Because if you are looking at a HUD property, for example, the local housing authority owns it. If you're looking at a project-based property, go to your tax records. If you go to your tax assessor, whoever that is, in their tax records, it's usually driven under Q Public, and then your county. You can generally put in an address and find out who the owners are at any property.
Okay. Mrs. Brown asked, how difficult is it to secure risk management insurance? How much would it cost? Do people of color experience difficulty in buying a risk management insurance?
I would say I've never have. I've insured a lot of stuff, a lot of property management companies and assets around the country, and I have not had any problems. I've never seen an upcharge on those. Now, what I will tell you is that if you don't want to pay to cover the properties themselves unless you have a lot of real estate. Let the owner do that, because unfortunately there are red lines. Redlining is where they take a look at certain zip codes and say, hey, that properties or that neighborhood has a lot of crime, and therefore we're going to charge more for their insurance, right? Their liability insurance and that sort of thing. That can happen. Here's something that you may not know. Believe it or not, property management companies and owners are oftentimes blacklisted, meaning they will not, no insurance company in the country will write a policy for them. They will provide them zero coverage because of the number of violent crimes or activities that have occurred. So again, you got to ask a lot of questions when you're talking about managing real estate, and what you don't know, ask somebody to make sure you know, because like Mama always said, it isn't worth a darn afterwards. But believe it or not, you would be shocked if you pull one property out of a portfolio and that one property happens to have most of the crime, especially if we're talking about lots of fires or thefts or murders and that sort of thing. Good luck. There's probably not even going to be insurance offered on it, just so you know. Next question.
Natividad Seafield asked, they are the president of Park Plaza Cooperative, a resident-owned manufactured home community. One of the things we're finding as this type of housing is finding good property management companies that know the rules and laws about manufactured housing, yep. And even more so as we turn into cooperatives, resident-owned. What are you finding yourself with this issue?
Absolutely the very same thing. You have hit one right on the head. The manufactured housing world is a very unique thing. And I will tell you, I have managed every type of real estate in the world, but I have never managed one of those. And it is because the rules around manufactured housing and cooperatives is very, very different. And you need to know all of those, not just from the state levels, but the local levels. Everything changes. And hiring a good manager may be different than a management company. So yeah, I think that's going to be a challenge for you. I wish I could give you some better advice, but man, you already know it. It is not good. But if I can give you one little bit of advice, advertise in places like Florida, advertise in places like Gulf Coast and other what we call warm states. The reason is there are a lot of retirees in places like that who may be running low on funds now in retirement and want to work kind of part-time, husband, wife, and they have proven to be really good teams of people in those environments. Next.
Shalonda Rivers, she's one of our board members from South Florida. She asked if you could speak to or about multifamily properties in reference to funds to assist residents with grants or tenants organizing and or self-sufficiency programs.
If it's public housing, your biggest source of funds is automatic. It's the tenant participation dollars. If you're not public housing and you are still in an organized event, group in some way, and you're trying to find dollars, once about every 5 years, come on, I can speak English. Health and Human Services, HHS, there we go, puts out a grant about every 5 years that is targeted to generally single mothers who may be receiving any sort of either TANF, housing, or even SNAP benefits. That particular grant pays a lot and does quite well. It used to be, if I were correct, about a $500,000 grant, and it paid for a lot of job training and other skills training, including business development training, to help that particular target audience to get something. Beyond that, I would not hesitate to take a look at the local hospital authorities. Hospital authorities are really good at having grant opportunities. I'd like for you to take a look there at your local hospitals. Center what you're talking about around health, again, around health and safety. Show how you can reduce the numbers of people showing up in the emergency rooms, that sort of thing. That's been crazy successful for us. And then you might just try the old grassroots effort of going around and talking to local businesses. We once, I had a contract here in North Georgia, and they had a resident services person who went out to every business and literally raised, I think, around $15,000 at the drop of the hat for training. And I know you're gonna think I'm kidding, but I'm not. Her biggest donor came from the local mortuary. I mean, the funeral home said, listen, we're tired of seeing all these young kids come through the door. And they gave her like $2,000 or $3,000 alone. So again, sometimes you just have to leave the government alone and then go grassroots. I think that's where you're gonna best find it. Lastly, take a look at your development. Oh God, I'm sorry guys, it's late in the day now, so my brain starts to go crazy. Workforce development. Workforce development organizations have lots of money. Oh, they have a crap load of cash. Every year they have a lot of money, but they plan it a year out. Get to know those people, talk to them, see how you can start getting your people in on those things. And then very last on the list, goodwill. Whether you like them or not, whether you love them or not, if you have a good and active goodwill in your community, they are always looking for good people to move through their jobs programs. That is a great resource. You may not get the money, but you can absolutely do a partnership and start moving your people. All right, next question. I'm sorry for that one, but yeah.
No worries. Shalonda said thank you. She appreciates it.
You're welcome.
Linda wanted to know if you have a link to the HHS info that you mentioned.
I have
an old, send it to me and I can send it.
I have an old grant that I can, and I don't, because you have, here's the problem. Go to grants.gov, okay? When you go to grants.gov, you have to register, follow the process, not high tech. Once you get registered, you can get all the grants sent to you daily if you choose, or weekly whenever they come out. Or you can search them. And if you go through, search the grants for HHS, I can't remember what it's called offhand, but I will send that over to you all, and I will, and then you can take a look at it from there. And then you can start searching to see what timeline it's on, and I hope it's still available, okay?
I'll make sure to send that out.
Yeah.
Sherry wanted to know, how do you become licensed?
Licensed to do what?
I'm not sure. Sherry, if you want to put
Yeah.
in the chat.
Yeah, let her confirm that for me real fast.
And then last one we have right now is Tyree wanted to know, how do we handle an issue like a portion of the development wanting to go down this path with the 12% that are recipients of public assistance, et cetera, and have no income to contribute, and you know there are going to be issues because if they don't pay public housing, they're not going to pay the RMC.
That's exactly right, Tyree. Yeah, that's right, Tyree. Oh, you know, if I could ever get two people in a room and agree on anything, I would be the best man and the genius of the world. It is so hard. You're going to have difficulty, right? But you have to convince them of the right reasons why. And that'll be your first exercise as to whether or not your management plan and logic to do this even makes sense. Because you really need to sit down with all of the people, invite everybody in the room, right? You can't force those to come who won't. Send them the information. Maybe it'll inspire them to show up for a meeting. Talk about it a lot before you think about doing it. And maybe you can win over some of those other people. But remember, you still have to explain why you want to do this and what you can bring to the table that you don't currently get under the housing authority.
Sherry responded to, she said, license as a manager or management company.
Oh, okay, thank you. I was wondering, but I didn't want to be an idiot. Okay, well, this gets real easy. Depending upon the state in which you live, Sherry, licensing is sometimes nothing and sometimes it's a little something. In many states, in order to manage property for a third party, you have to have a broker's license as part of your business. To have a broker's license can mean that you all, as the resident association, and then that resident management corporation, you go out and you literally hire a licensed broker, a licensed real estate broker. And you say, Mr. Broker, Mrs. Broker, we want to hire you to be our broker of record because we're going to manage this property. Okay, it's that simple. Now, for staff, any of the leasing consultant staffs or some property managers and assistants, anybody who is leasing the real estate, all right? This is different than a license to sell real estate. Many states now require a leasing license. It's a short course. It's usually pretty inexpensive. By inexpensive, I mean a lot, like $250 or something. But the company should pay for that for you, or you should be using your tenant participation dollars to pay for that. But you get your leasing license, and then anyone who works there is allowed to lease on that property, but you also are going to manage it. But the management company itself will generally need to have a broker. I don't know of any state in the union that does not require that unless you are working directly for the owner. Now, let me say that again. If you manage property directly for the owner in many states, you do not have to have a separate broker's license. But if you're doing what's called third-party fee management, you would generally have to have a broker involved. And I remember when I started my company, to give you framework, now this is a long, long time ago now, my friend. We're talking almost 29 years, it'll be on September 9th. I paid a guy $300 a month for his broker's license to hang in my office. And he did nothing. Well, he did steal from me, so you got to give him that, which is your risk, right? Because the broker has ultimate control because their name and their numbers on it. So make sure in that relationship, you're putting in place the right safeguards, like the broker can't write checks without your approval, that sort of thing, okay? I hope that helps.
And I think we have one more question from Nakia. Does Lloyd's of London sell RM insurance? She noted that they're in the limelight due to insurance during slavery. RM discounted insurance, PR, question mark.
Yeah, I would say to you, first of all, Lloyd's is one of the most expensive places to go. And as an American company, you only go to Lloyd's of London for things that American companies will not insure. I'm going to make it real simple, something everybody will understand. Hey, I own a Rolls Royce. Okay? If you know anything about insurance, most American companies won't cover a Rolls Royce. It's too expensive. Lloyd's of London will cover a Rolls Royce. That sort of thing, right? So if you're going to Lloyd's of London, you better have a really good reason because you're going to pay through the nose for it. And in terms of the history, of many of these companies. Let me just give you some really good advice, folks. Hold your nose if you decide to play the game. Because one of the things you have to know, in many states, you may be asked or required, and note I said required, it's really funky the way they do it, to become a member of the National Realtors Association. And the National Realtors Associations were probably the most guilty for any sort of discriminatory housing practices. I mean, they were the absolute nastiest, but you're still gonna have to pay them a fee every month or every year, or find a way around them. So I understand your concern. I respect your concern. And let me tell you, that's one of the reasons I gave up my license to sell real estate. I had in 2 states. I gave it up because I just wasn't going to give those SOBs another one of my pennies. Period. End of story. So I respect you 100%. But do your homework. Get with a good broker. I have a good broker if you need one. These guys have lots and lots of companies. So if you decide to go down that path and you're having difficulty, these guys have never let me down. They've been able to insure every resident business I've ever sent their way for the last 22 years.
Keith, and on that note, we are going to just say, this is why we're such a fan of yours. This was an excellent, excellent presentation. It was like being in a masterclass, really. And I really do hope that the residents who are on this call will have an opportunity to, when we do send this out, because we will send the recording out, please go back and rewatch this and share the information with people in your communities as well, because Keith was dropping knowledge this evening. And so I really do appreciate you Keith, and the time that you provide and the information that you provide to the residents on this call. Thank you.
Renee, thank you all. And I know that I have a lot of information in my little head and it starts to fall. And I apologize sometimes because I can go quick. I'm good at it. But that's why I put my contact in there. I think Mrs. Brown, I think Tyree, and all the people who are on the phone who know me and have me for years, send me an email. I respond to everything I get. And Mrs. Brown has chastised me for not reading to the bottom of the email. So I will actually read all your email. She's laughing right now. Thank you guys. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you so much, Keith. And yes, I can vouch for him that yes,
yeah, right there.
all email.
Hey, and I'm going to send the HHS grant. I'll send it over tomorrow, but not tonight. Is that okay?
That's okay with us. Thank you so much.
All yours, Kyle. Thank you guys so much. My pleasure. I appreciate it. Bye-bye.
You as well. Bye now. Oh, that was wonderful. All right, everyone. So now we're going to hear, and I know we're running just a little bit short on time, but we're going to hear from Kyle with some very important updates for the field. Kyle.
Hey, yeah, just real quick, just want to give an update on where the next COVID package is. Negotiations are underway right now. This past weekend, it was Steve Mnuchin, Chuck Schumer, and Speaker Pelosi met to discuss what the package will look like. Obviously, our priorities are $100 billion in rental assistance, an eviction moratorium, and $11.5 billion in ESG money for homeless assistance. Right now, they don't seem to be in agreement on much of anything. Speaker Pelosi said today she doesn't expect to have something until the end of next week. She's hopeful that Republicans will acquiesce to their demands, which in the HEROES Act, which passed in May, included our policy priorities. So it was May, correct? I think it was May. But I will drop the link to our Take Action form where you can contact your member of Congress. And by doing that, we're hopeful that if members of Congress see enough of their constituents urging them to take action on our priorities, they will urge congressional leadership to do the same. So I just sent the link right there. Please feel free to share it in your networks and your communities. We're hopeful that we can get something done soon. So that's it.
All right, thanks so much, Kyle. And so yes, as promised, we will get this recording out to you. We'll also share with you the slides that Keith shared with us this evening. And always, as always, please go to our website. We have tons of information on the website that hopefully will be helpful to you in your advocacy. Our website, many of you already know it, but our website is NLIHC.org, NLIHC.org. And there you should be able to find information pertaining to your states, data for your states, and information that, again, will help in your advocacy. As always, we're always looking for guests and hoping also too that we'll have residents who can share what's going on in your communities. So if you're interested in being on one of the future Tenant Talk Live calls, please reach out to us, to me, to Kyle. You can reach us at outreach@nlihc.org. Again, it's outreach@nlihc.org. And the next Tenant Talk Live is scheduled for August the 17th, which is a Monday at 6 o'clock. Thank you everyone for joining today. We are so grateful that you've taken time out of your very busy schedules to be with us this evening. Until next time, everyone take care.
Thanks.